Well, welcome back to CHAR channel, actively implementing woody biomass to energy and PFAS destruction projects utilizing its proprietary HTP technology. Trades on the TSXV under YES and the OTC under CTRNF. This interview is disseminated on behalf of CHAR, but we're privileged to be joined by Andrew White, the CEO. And first and foremost, welcome, sir.
Thanks, Kyle. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and a pleasure to get you on. And I just want to dive into this first for newer audiences, maybe broad view the company. Give us that elevator pitch to what you guys are doing there.
Yeah, and I always find it easiest to start with the technology and then kind of broaden out. So what is HTP? So HTP is high temperature pyrolysis, but all you really need to know about that is it means high temperature. So for us, that's 950 degrees Celsius, and pyrolysis just means without oxygen. So we're heating stuff up without oxygen. By heating stuff up without oxygen, you don't burn it, but you crack it. And so our primary market focus is on taking woody biomass, wood residuals, leftovers from forest harvesting or, shipping pallets or forestry operations or sawmills, heating that up at high temperature without oxygen and cracking that wood into a gas and a carbon. The gas we can further upgrade into things like renewable natural gas, so sell it to the gas utilities as a renewable energy product. And the solid, we can go through another process to basically turn it into what we call biocarbon. And that biocarbon can be used in various metallurgical applications to offset metallurgical coal. So really kind of upgrading that use case of wood waste into these two higher value applications.
Yeah, definitely appreciate the insight. So let's just kind of talk about where we're going here from a milestone standpoint. What should investors focus on through 2026? You did recently update that phase one at Thorhold, targeting commercial production in Q2 of 2026. But what should we be paying attention to?
Yeah, and I think that's obviously an important one because Thorold's really going to be our commercial de-risk platform that we can work from. I'm here in Thorold right now, just because our boardroom's on the second floor. You can't see all of what's going on back there. And so yeah, all the equipment's being installed. We're bumping stuff, so we are doing some of that commissioning work, getting into commercial operations. Out of the site, we are selling smaller quantities of, smaller but commercial quantities of biocarbon to the likes of Dofasco, whom we have an offtake agreement with. But of course, scaling that up to this, broadly speaking, commercial scale is an exciting milestone. Outside of that, Thorold has a second phase, which is the renewable natural gas. So we need to, tell everyone who's our funding partner for phase two. So we're excited to talk about that. Who's our off taker for the gas, and we're excited to talk about that. And what's the schedule and the timeline associated with bringing renewable natural gas out of this site. And then we have a couple other projects in the pipeline, namely our Lake Nipigon project, where we're partners with Lake Nipigon Forest Management, Inc., which is owned by the four First Nations communities of the Lake Nipigon Forest. So that project's moving forward nicely. They're starting to do some civil works and putting up some of the initial infrastructure for our project. So that's moving quite nicely. And then going kind of west to east through Ontario and Quebec, we're also working on a project in Espanola at the former Domtar Pulp and Paper Mill that was acquired by one of our partners, the BMI Group. And then into Quebec, another project, Saint Félicien. So all of those are really progressing through that development into construction and deployment phase through 26, which is awesome and very, very exciting.
Yeah, truly pivotal year. I guess we're kind of in this launch pad phase. And I mean, you mentioned the potential to export Ontario-made biocarbons to Europe. I mean, why is the European market attractive right now comparably to maybe the North American?
Yeah, and for biocarbon, the fundamental use case of it is it reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So metallurgical coal or metallurgical biocarbon, which is the replacement, is used as an ingredient in things like steel making. So it's not just burned for energy. It's a ingredient. It's technically called a reductant, and it reduces the iron. Um, and metallurgical coal, when it's used in that application, 1 ton of metallurgical coal gives you about 3 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. 1 ton of biocarbon gives you almost no greenhouse gas emissions. You have to account for logistics and trucks to move it, but broadly speaking, very, very little. And so when you look at a jurisdiction where there's a compliance cost associated with those emissions, or low carbon intensity procurement for things like steel, that really drives the market. And so I'd say Europe is ahead of us. Obviously, different provinces in Canada have different GHG emission strategies. And so there is certainly a market here in Canada, and our partners like ArcelorMittal Dofasco are certainly well committed to their decarbonization plans. And so we're thrilled to work with them. But really, it's being driven a lot from that European market. And we have an interesting balance in Europe where that's where the strongest demand is because of the greenhouse gas emission regulations, but they also don't have, nearly the forced operations that we see in places like Canada. So we've got the feedstock to make the biocarbon, and they've really got the use and the demand for it.
Yeah, great to hear. And you guys are also in a good position almost financially, right? I mean, you got a recent $4 million private placement, brought in some pretty good investors, and you also got non-dilutive funding from the government. Those grants, that stuff's incredible. So from a balance sheet standpoint, what are you guys looking to utilize that cash for? Kind of bring up Thor? I mean, just give us a view there too.
Yeah, there's certainly a few things. So the non-dilutive funding, so we announced that in December, 2.5 million from the Ontario Forest Biomass Program. And that's really about upgrading our pelleting capability. So turning or making those finished biocarbon pellets. So it's a hard, dense cylinder. So upgrading the equipment so we can have higher throughput and get some of that product used here in Ontario and used elsewhere in places like Europe. And then on the private placement, we want to be, well positioned to be able to take advantage of strategic opportunities as they present themselves. So, part of it certainly there's some element of working capital, but a lot more around how do we grow the business faster.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe just again for those newer investors stumbling in, why should we be paying attention to the company today?
Yeah, I think there's a number of reasons to pay attention to the company today. So obviously 2026 just in general is a pivotal year for CHAR at Tech as we deploy these projects. What we've seen is even with a change in US administration, the global opportunity for biocarbon and decarbonization is there and is growing. And, the market value for our products, be it the renewable natural gas or the biocarbon, is also growing. So that's a really good sign. So between really right place, right time in terms of the company in the market verticals and the execution that's happening this year, I mean, this is the pivotal year. And one other thing probably to quickly touch on, because you mentioned it in your intro about PFAS or PFAS. PFAS are forever chemicals, polyfluorinated alkyl substances. And in 2025, we built and commissioned a demonstration plant with Synagro Technologies, who's the US's largest processor of biosolids, which is the leftovers from wastewater treatment plants, which have PFAS in them, generally speaking. We commissioned this plant to show that our technology destroys PFAS. So we've got this other market vertical that is also really strengthening in terms of the demand for PFAS destruction through great strategic partners across the board, really. So on the PFAS, Synagro, on biocarbon, ArcelorMittal, we have Lake Nipigon Forest Management Inc. for feedstock supply. We've got BMI Group and Industrial as plant builders and landlords and access to sites and biomass. So all of these confluence of things, it's a pretty awesome time for CHAR Tech.
Well, on that note, I appreciate taking the time today as we pass it off to the viewers. As always, we'd love to know what you think in that comment section. Consider subscribing as news and catalysts come down the wire. We're going to bring it to you here. But again, on that, as always, we look forward to catching you in the next one.